Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation, Baze. I would like to talk to you today about decommissioning considerations in nuclear power plant projects. And I would like to do it through also the example of PAX 2 because it's quite a recent one. But before that, I would like to introduce you to the Hungarian nuclear landscape. This is not a total picture because we first actually in Hungary had a research reactor here in the 12th district, not super far from you, and also another reactor here in Budapest at the University of Technology. Those were before PAX 1, and then in 1966, an agreement was signed between USSR and Hungary to build a nuclear power plant. And later in the project, it was settled that it's going to be 4 VBR-440 reactors. They became operational between 1982 and 1987. And they account for around 40 to 44% of electricity generation, which is a very high amount. And their operational licenses were actually issued for 30 years initially, but these have expired in 2012 and between 2012 and 2017. However, these were prolonged by 20 additional years, and actually these days there are ongoing discussions that maybe these operating licenses should be extended even further. However, we have another project, and it's the PAX 2 project. The first idea to see the feasibility of another nuclear power plant in Hungary was in form of the 2007 Teller project, named after Ede Teller, the famous Hungarian physicist who was the founding father of the hydrogen bomb. In 2009, the parliament gave its preliminary consent to building additional blocks at the PAX site. And in 2014, an agreement was signed between Hungary and Russia on the construction of 2 additional reactors with 1200 megawatt electric output each. So the regulatory organ in Hungary is the Hungarian Atomic Energy Authority. It's led by a single director. It's not a commission type regulator. You've already touched upon regulatory independence. It's also quite an important issue in Hungary, and we've got quite a unique solution. So it used to be a regular government body. However, in 2022, they were restructured into an independent regulatory organ, and under the fundamental law of Hungary, this means that they are politically independent and professionally independent from the government. Their head, which is the president of this authority, can issue decrees, and they are also financially separate from the government, and they have a reporting obligations towards the parliament. The national legal framework in Hungary, the basis of it is the 1996 Act on Atomic Energy. However, it's more similar to a framework legislation, although with regards to certain issues, it's more detailed. However, when it comes to licensing, then we've got this 1-2022 decree issued by the Hungarian Atomic Energy Authority. It's actually not as new as the date suggests. It was when they were restructured. This decree, which was previously the government decree, was reissued. That's why it seems so new. It has a general part and 10 annexes attached to it. Those are called the nuclear safety rules. And basically these 10 annexes contain all the details of the licensing procedures, the contents of the license applications, and so on. However, we've also got guidelines issued by the Hungarian Atomic Energy Authority. These guidelines are not mandatory. However, they contain the methods in which the licensee can meet the safety requirements contained in the nuclear safety rules. Following them is not mandatory, but if the licensee decides not to follow them, the authority is also going to evaluate whether the methods used by the licensee to prove that they comply with the rules is adequate or not. Whereas if they follow it, then the authority is not going to evaluate the methodology. So licensing a nuclear power plant is a very complex procedure. Also in Hungary, it involves actually thousands of licenses. And we follow a multi-stage licensing approach. which begins actually, it's not even a license, it's the justification / decision in principle stage. This is more of a political decision that a country is going to embark on a nuclear project. In Hungary, this is required by the Act on Atomic Energy, that the commencement of the preparatory works for a nuclear power plant project, repository project, or the expansion of an existing nuclear power plant with new units requires the prior consent of the parliament. Actually, already with regards to the PAX-2 project, there have been some issues regarding it. On the basis of which this parliamentary resolution proposed by the government, on the basis of which the parliament made this decision to approve the initiation of the project, was very brief. It was only 1.5 pages long, which of course compared to the size and complexity of such a project is not sufficient. And it didn't mention decommissioning considerations at all. The Parliamentary Commissioner for Future Generation actually very much criticized this decision and said that this on the basis on which the Parliament made their decision should have been much more elaborate. The next stage, and with this we step into the realm of the so-called nuclear safety licensing, is the site license. In Hungary, site licensing follows a two-step approach. There is a site inspection and assessment license. It's basically, in this, the licensee showcases to the authority the methodology that they are going to use to assess the site. And then in the second license, which is the actual site license, the licensee applies this already pre-approved methodology to an actual site. So when it comes to these licenses, the Act on Atomic Energy or the nuclear safety rules contained in the annex of the decree don't contain any information on decommissioning considerations. However, if you look at the guideline, which corresponds to this licensing stage, then there is already a reference to decommissioning, that the documentation used for evaluating the site has to be made in a way that it's going to be good enough to be used in the subsequent life cycle and licensing stages of the nuclear power plant. So it has to be able to support the demonstration of certain compliance with site related requirements, and also it not only relates to the next implementation license, but also to the decommissioning license. So the documentation already for the site license has to be made in a way regarding the site that later on, when the decommissioning of the facility will happen, those considerations will be sufficient enough. The next license, and with this we again step out of the realm of nuclear safety licensing, is the environmental license. There is a separate authority responsible for it. In Hungary, nuclear power plants require an environmental protection license issued by the Environmental Protection Authority containing an environmental impact assessment. With regards to what has to be in the environmental impact assessment, there is a decree containing information on its content, and it specifies that it has to be made in a way that the assessments are made regarding separately each life cycle stage of the facility, so siting, implementation, and also decommissioning considerations. So they appear in siting, they appear in environmental impact assessment as well. Then the next license, and with this we step back into the nuclear safety licensing, is the implementation license. In Hungary, implementation license is the most complex one. In case of PAX-2, it involved hundreds of thousands of pages of documentation, and it basically showcases the full safety concept of the plant. It doesn't actually permit any construction works. The implementation license is an umbrella license, and if it's obtained, then individual licenses for certain construction works, installation licenses, manufacturing licenses can be obtained. The main document of this license is the PSR, which is the Preliminary Safety Assessment Report. And the PSR, or regarding the content of the PSR, the decree and in its annex, the nuclear safety rules corresponding to the implementation license contain information, and they already list that it has to address the decommissioning concept, the mean, the organizations of decommissioning, and then further information is provided in the guide, and the guide specifies that what does the concept mean, what does the means and organization mean, what kind of information has to be elaborated, but also the guide specifies that there has to be information on the cost of decommissioning, and the preliminary decommissioning plan as part of it has to be made. The next two licenses are the commissioning and operation licenses. The commissioning license comes after the construction of the facility, and it's basically a checkup on whether the facility was built according to the design intentions and the requirements, and it allows for the initial startup of the plant, the first fuel load, and system functionality tests. In this, a preliminary final version of the previously mentioned safety analysis report has to be submitted. It's an updated version of that document reflecting the already constructed nuclear power plant, and in it also there are updated information on the decommissioning consideration that were contained previously with regards to the implementation stage. Then the final license for the plant to start generating electricity is the operating license. In this, the final safety analysis report has to be submitted, and as part of it also again the decommissioning considerations are updated. And moreover, in order to obtain this license, a separate requirement is that they have to demonstrate the safe disposal of spent fuel and nuclear waste in line with the latest generally accepted practices in the nuclear industry. Then we come to the financing issues. I also want to mention this, that how all this is the financing works and who is responsible for the management of waste and so on. Bajai have mentioned the 2011 Euratom directive, which concerns spent fuel and waste management. There is a reference to having national policies and programs which implement these national policies in place in the countries regarding spent fuel management and waste management. This is reflected in the Act on Atomic Energy in Article 40. According to this, the government designates a body who makes proposals on the policy programs and ensures the performance of these tasks, manages the final disposal, also the temporary storage of spent fuel, the closure of the nuclear fuel cycle, and also the decommissioning of the facilities. In Hungary, in practice, this was done previously to this reform structure of the Hungarian Atomic Energy Authority back in the late 90s, and the government appointed back then this Hungarian Atomic Energy Authority. It was then not the independent regulatory organ to designate a body that is going to be responsible for this task, and that was the Radioactive Waste Management Liability Company. Since 2022, actually, the ownership rights are practiced by the Ministry of Energy. This company manages these policies, makes proposals on them, the programs as well, and responsible for the closing of the fuel cycle, for the decommissioning of the plant, interim storage of spent fuel, and also the storage of nuclear waste. And how are they financed? It's called the Central Nuclear Financial Fund, from which they are financed. Considering how much has to be paid into this fund, it's managed in a way that this body, the Radioactive Waste Management Liability Company, makes proposals how much the costs are going to be. Then this is evaluated within the Ministry of Energy. Also, the Hungarian Atomic Energy Authority expresses their opinion, and then the ministry approves. And then on the requirement of how much has to be paid annually will appear in the act on the central budget. And here you can see that in case of PAX 1, this is 87 million euros, which has to be paid divided into monthly payments. And in case of PAX 2, this is 500,000 euros, because generally for nuclear power plants, they have to start paying into this fund once they are operational, but on an ad hoc basis, they can be required to pay it even before they are operational. That's the case in case of PAX 2 as well. And the total budget of this fund at this point is 1.8 billion euros, and from that they manage these several facilities. On the bottom you can see the interim storage facility for spent fuel close to the PAX site. On the top you can see Bátorpáti, that's for nuclear waste storage, and we have another storage facility that is not for waste coming from the nuclear power stations. And of course they have a methodology in place for this budget to mitigate the inflation associated problems with it. So in Hungary, I would say that we are pretty well following implementing decommissioning considerations, because as you've seen, besides the initial justification and decision in principle state, then from then onwards, when it comes to siting, it's implemented. In PAX's siting documentation, there was a separate chapter on it. When it comes to the environmental impact assessment, again, for PAX 2's environmental impact assessment, there was a separate chapter on this matter. Then, as part of the PSR in the implementation license, it's included, and from then onwards as well. So the final decommissioning plan is actually submitted during the decommissioning licensing stage. That's a different one. And then when they want to remove actually the facility, the nuclear power plant from regulatory oversight, then the decommissioning report has to be submitted. That's it. Thank you.